Hey guys and gals, welcome to Boomer TV, the TV variety and game show. Now, if you grew up on television about the time that I did, the depiction of gays, of the lifestyle, was practically non-existent to those of us who were watching, which was all of us pretty much. And so our guest today explores the fight for lesbian and gay visibility on 20th century American television. Hi everyone, I'm Andy Asher. I'm editor over here at bloomerboomer.com. You know, growing up in the 60s, depiction of gays was more about, innuendo, like wink wink, if you know what I mean, type of thing. I had no sense of the gay lifestyle in Hollywood, and I actually grew up just right near there. So Steve Capsuto has published a highly researched and as a revised edition of the book, Alternate Channels, Queer Images on 20th Century TV. Let's find out more in a moment. We are playing Battle Royale today. If you watched last week's show, I landed way out in the ocean and I couldn't even get back to shore before the storm eliminated me altogether. Hopefully I will have better luck today. And just a couple of other mentions here is that normally I play the single version. So last night I was playing with my grandson and we were playing duos. That's what you see up there, duos. And that means you play with two people. Normally I'm just playing, one person at a time, right? So this game's going to be a little bit different from that sense, but it's just as much fun. And so that may explain that. And in a moment where you're going to talk to Steven Capsuto, who is the author, again, of Alternate Channels, Queer Images on 20th Century TV. And remember, I love marmalade. Well, Steve, thanks a lot for joining us today. You have done a ton of research on it, haven't you?
Yes. Well, the first edition of the book came out 20 years ago, and that took, I think, 11 years to research. I started researching it in 1989. I had been volunteering with an LGBT crisis hotline in Philadelphia, and we were getting a lot of calls from teenagers who's, this was a different time. There weren't a lot of out gay people. Our lives weren't really reflected in the culture. And we were getting calls from lesbian and gay teenagers saying that they were contemplating suicide. And when we would ask them, well, what do you think gay people's lives are like, to get a sense of what they thought they were sort of, quote unquote, doomed to, they always said, I only know what I see on TV. And that really got me thinking, because when I had been, 11, 12, 13 years old and, knew that I was attracted to guys, there were some pretty decent images on TV. And I wondered what had happened between the 70s and 1989. And so I originally set out to write a book that was almost like an activist manual to say, all right, what worked in the 70s, right? Because in the early to mid 70s, like 1973 to 75, most of the portrayals of gay or lesbian or even bi or trans characters in primetime dramas were like, serial killers and child molesters and terrorists. And I thought, well, somehow activists must have stepped in and convinced the networks that this was not a great thing to do to a minority that was trying to get their rights. And so I set out to document that. And what I realized was what had happened in between was the AIDS crisis. So the movement lost a lot of its activists, and the movement had, excuse me, hold on.
Take a breath there, take a drink. Well, while you're doing that, let me just, if you could maybe set up with that time period that you were talking about, and what jumped out most during that period to you.
Well, I think the single episode that most caught my attention, because it sort of epitomized what was happening 73 to 75, there's an episode of Policewoman about this whole gang of killer lesbians that run a nursing home for rich people, and they steal their money and strangle them. And so it was this sort of, 70s TV archetypes. You had these, sweet little old granny characters being strangled by mean masculine lesbians. Like one is like this sort of growling ex-marine. It was just so many stereotypes, and that's really what got the movement to start lobbying the networks to say, you would not do this to any other minority, where this would be the only image that you have, on dramas.
Yeah,
Um,
indeed. Is there someone, do you think, to blame for what happened during
no,
that period?
it's these were you have to realize gay people were mostly closeted because we were considered criminals. Like when I was born in 1964, you could be sent to jail for being gay every place but Illinois, and Illinois had just decriminalized it, right? So people couldn't afford to be out. You could lose your job, your home, your kids could be taken away if you had kids. There was, violence. If you were attacked, the police would re-victimize you often in many places. So we were invisible. And what being invisible meant is we were not only invisible to the greater public, we were invisible to each other, right? So imagine if you were like a 15-year-old lesbian growing up in a culture where there are no real lesbians you can see. And then there are these stereotypes out there that were just sort of taken for granted. The psychiatrists were saying, that we're emotionally unstable and prone to be violent and prone to be, whatever, arsonists or whatever, that we would sell. It was the height of the Cold War. Homosexuals will sell out American secrets to Moscow. All those stereotypes were out there. So these scriptwriters were just reflecting what was seen as common knowledge, even if it had nothing to do with our actual lives, which is how stereotypes work.
Yeah, you're right. And what I noticed too, and I saw a quote of yours in the book, the 1950s sissy wrestlers. I mean, talk about a stereotype.
Yeah, exactly. There were these wrestlers who were, by all accounts, actually straight, but it was a popular, pro wrestling. You have all these sort of over-the-top types. And one of the things that was very successful was to pretend to be a stereotypical gay man, and then and to lose the bout, because then people would cheer for what looked like a gay bashing on TV. And that was like 40s, early 50s. You had Gorgeous George, and Ricky Starr was a little bit different. He was this like ex-ballet dancer who had become a pro wrestler, but he was still sort of playing with the gay stereotypes. I don't know what his actual story was.
I'm just I'm wondering what was happening in the executive suites of the TV networks. What was going on? The discussions going on up there.
Very early on, when it first, first of all, for the early years of television, there were actually rules against depicting gay characters, or any type of. I think what the broadcasting code said was. Sexual abnormality is generally an unacceptable topic for programming. And if you combine that with the clause that said that criminality could not be portrayed in a positive light, and we were defined as criminals everywhere, it meant you could not portray clearly identified gay characters, but you could do a lot of hinting, right? So there was an actor called Franklin Pangborn who had been in the movies since the 30s, and he made his living playing, and he was a gay man, and he played these sort of prissy stereotypes. You would recognize him if you saw him in like old Fred Astaire movies and things. And you couldn't say a character was gay, but you could hint. So there's an episode of, in the 50s, Ann Southern had a sitcom called Private Secretary. Later got rerun under the title Susie. So there's an episode where Franklin Pangborn's the guest. And again, you can't say the character's gay. But what you could do is you could make him this sort of prissy, fussy male secretary. So a man in what was thought of at the time as a women's profession. Who has like a flower in his lapel and white gloves clutched in one hand and a walking stick and this sort of like, perpetual pout on his face. And he explains that his dream in life wasn't to be a secretary, it was to be an interior designer, but that he was too delicate for that profession because when you have to hang drapes, you have to climb ladders and he bruises so easily. That's what you could do. On the women's side, you could have these sort of, masculine murderer characters. And then the public would read that as a lesbian.
What do you think the viewers were identifying these people as? Were they considered calling them gay? Were they calling them eccentric? Were they calling them weird? Did they really put that all together, or how do you look at that?
I think there were certainly people who said that's a fag. That's that. I mean, that I think I could picture lots of guys sitting at home looking at that Franklin Pangborn character or any number of other characters who were like, prissy florists and things. And that was their stereotype of, someone you would want to beat up.
And during that time,
yeah, go ahead.
During that time, there must have been many closeted gays working on TV, right?
They were behind the scenes. Yeah. Milt Josephsberg, who was a producer on All in the Family in the 70s and the Jack Benny Show in the 50s, he said that in the 50s, I'm trying to remember how he worded it. It was a little bit snide because he was saying this in the 60s or 70s. It was, I think he said like every show had to have at least 2 fairies on the staff in case one phoned in sick. That was his joke. A lot of, in the 50s, when all this live television work started to move from New York to LA and Hollywood, a lot of people who had worked behind the scenes in the New York theater, lighting people and costume people and so on, moved west and worked in early live television and early film television.
I gotcha. Well, let me ask you about what you feel about the Netflix miniseries Hollywood.
I like what he was trying to do with it. I think, it's like an alternative history. What if homophobia hadn't been as bad? What if racism hadn't been as bad? And on the one hand, it's a lovely fantasy, but on the other hand, it kind of allows viewers to ignore what actually happened. So I'm mixed feelings about it. I am happier with it, partly because I worked on it. The Apple TV 5-part docuseries Visible Out on Television, which, my piece of it was very behind the scenes. I helped them find clips. I reviewed their scripts for historical accuracy. And then the producers took all the stuff they had and created something magnificent. And it's not just a history of LGBTQ images on television. In telling that story, they use that as a window to tell the story of how the treatment of LGBTQ people in American society changed from the 40s and 50s up to the present. And it's a great crash course if somebody doesn't know that history and wants to learn it and be entertained, because there's all these sitcom clips and drama clips, and it's a fantastic series, and that's called Visible Out on Television.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I enjoyed Hollywood, and I thought the acting of the principal characters was amazing, yeah. And I was entertained by it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Bring us up to our current time frame, and what's your observations about what's happening with the depiction of the LGBTQ lifestyle on mainstream TV?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's much harder to keep track of. When I was writing the first edition of Alternate Channels, there were like 4 TV networks. So if I had 3 VCRs running on different rooms of the house, I could get everything. Now there's just so much, and that's great. What's great about there being so many different types of images, and now we're even getting shows from other countries, is there is less riding on each portrayal, right? In 1974, if you had 3 lesbian portrayals, that was all the lesbians on the air, and it mattered. Now you can have, Batwoman is a lesbian or a bi woman. We don't know. I think lesbian. And you've got a bi male character on Roswell, New Mexico. You've got Pose. You've got, all these different shows, and even shows that aren't focused around LGBTQ images. Like you take a show, a miniseries like Unorthodox on Netflix, which is, mainly about a Hasidic Jewish woman from Brooklyn who leaves her community and becomes secular. Mm-hmm. But there's her mom who left the community because she was a lesbian and didn't fit in there, right? So we're getting a sort of casual inclusiveness, and there's enough of it that less is riding on each portrayal. The other thing that's changed now that's very exciting is it used to be that a lot of the scripts were, a straight person's fantasy about what a gay person or a bi person was like, or a cisgender person's fantasy of what a trans person was like. And often then the characters were marginalized, right? It was the straight person's story or the cisgender person's story. And the queer person was there as the best friend who lived down the hall, who's like the sounding board for the straight or cisgender person's problems, right? And now You have shows like more in recent years, Pose, where a lot of the writers are trans women of color writing about trans women of color. Or a couple of years ago, Sense8, which was this sort of supernatural adventure show on Netflix. But the producers were two trans women. And so the trans woman character is the star of her own life. She's at the center of her own story. She's not a complication in someone else's life. And there's also, a male couple on the show, a female couple on the show, where one is trans and one isn't. It's when you have people writing their own stories, being, telling their stories rather than being talked about in the third person, it changes everything.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate your time. I know your book is on Amazon, and
There it is.
there it is. There it is. We'll have a picture and also a link to it.
And it's so you can get it on, Amazon has it on ebook and paperback. You can order the paperback through other bookshops. And the book is on most ebook platforms. It's on about 15 different ebook platforms. It's called Alternate Channels. Some people get it wrong and say alternative channels. No, it's Alternate Channels by Steven Capsuto.
Very nice, very nice. Well, just a quick update on my show today on the game Battle Royale. Normally I can work with all of the stuff going on here, but for some reason it got the better of me, and so I didn't do very well. Basically, I got wiped out by the storm once again. I don't let that happen, but it does. So, but I'm going to have a winning game, and sometimes I bring back those tame, quiet shows like Journey, which doesn't have all this going on. Maybe that's what I'm ready for right now. But I want to thank you for being here. Let me again thank Steven Capsuto, author of Alternate Channels, Queer Images on 20th Century TV. And in the meantime, please like us and subscribe on your favorite social media. And we'll see you next time. And remember, I love marmalade. I think